Hello crafty friends, welcome to another card making video. So I had the idea that I wanted to use my brayer to create some streaks of colour towards the top of a panel that I'd put on a card front. And I decided to start off by playing with my watercolours, adding some warm colours to a piece of mixed media paper, and then, as I say, rolling them out with my brayer to create some streaks. So I started off with a magenta type colour, then I added a red and an orange and a yellow on top of that, and I was really pleased with the way this turned out. I loved the organic look of it. The trick, I think, is not to put too much watercolour on the card because you want it to roll out, but you want to get a bit of definition. You want some raggedy edges. So it's better to put a small amount of watercolour on the card, brayer it out, and then add more if you think it needs it. You can also dry each layer before you put the next one on. This will give you more of a layered look because the colours won't mix and mingle, they'll just lie on top of each other. But you can also not dry them and see what kind of effect you get. On this particular piece of card, once I dried all my layers of watercolour, I spattered on some watercolour to give it a little bit more movement and energy. And then I had a second bash at it, and I thought to myself, this time I'm going to start with the lightest, palest colour and have that as my background colour, and have more of that than the other colours. And then I'll add smaller amounts of the pinks and oranges and have them sit on top of the yellow. I did dry each layer before I put the next one down, but I cut that out of the videoing so this video didn't get super long. But out of the two panels that I created with my watercolours, the second one was my favourite. I thought it had a bit more subtlety to it. So I chose that one to make a card with. I do some more experiments, and I will put those at the end of the video for you to see in case you're interested. But I'll show you the card making process now. I decided to cut my panel down with a stitched rectangle panel die, as I often do, and then I matted it with black, and that was mainly because the mixed media paper I used is slightly creamy compared to the card blanks that I have, and the black border will just stop the cream and the white jarring with each other. And because I'd added black with the card, I thought I'd do some stamping with black. So I stamped a visual triangle of 3 stitched circles, and then I layered 3 splatty stamps over them. I didn't want to add any focal type die cuts, image type die cuts to this card. I wanted to add a sentiment, but that was pretty much it. But I felt the sentiment needed something behind it. So I used a ticket die to cut a ticket from vellum, and I placed this where I wanted the sentiment to go. I adhered it with my Tim Holtz Tiny Attacher staple, so I didn't need to add any glue to it. And for my sentiment, I chose Sending Warm Wishes. And I stamped that in the same black ink I'd used earlier and cut it out with a small stitched rectangle die and placed it on the vellum using some glue. I used double-sided tape to stick the whole panel to the front of a card blank, and I gave it just the teeniest, tiniest little white border all the way around, and I think that made everything really pop. As a finishing touch, I wanted to add some bling, so I used matte gel medium to glue down some grungy gold circles that I cut from one of those papers that I bought back from Japan. To mop up excess glue, I just dabbed over it with a dry paper towel. And that was this card finished. I love the way it turned out. I love the contrast between the bright colours and the black ink and the white background. And I love those pops of gold. Right, now I'm going to show you some other similar experiments that I did. So I'm using the same mixed media paper. I'm using the same brayer, but here I'm using undiluted Distress ink Reinkers. The first colour was Salvage Patina, the second colour was Cracked Pistachio, and the third colour was Picked Raspberry. So these are going on neat, and as you can see, they're really bold. I wasn't overly keen on how intense these were, so I thought I'd try diluting them. So I added a blob of water to my mixed media paper and then a couple of drops of the Reinker and spread that out, and I was really pleased with this. The colours were a lot lighter and more transparent. With the cracked pistachio, instead of putting the water on my paper, I put the water on my glass mat and added a drop of the Reinker to that and mixed that with my paintbrush, and then added the coloured water onto my card and braided that out, and that worked well too. And I did the same thing with the pink. This was maybe more intense than I wanted it. I could have diluted it further, but it still turned out fine. For my next experiment, I used Distress Oxide Reinkers. I've got Tumble Glass as my first colour, a nice light blue. I put that on undiluted. Then I added a smaller amount of Shaded Lilac, and then I added an even smaller amount of Mermaid Lagoon, I think it was. And again, really bold, really intense. So I diluted these and tried again. I put water on my glass mat, added 1 drop from the Reinker, picked it up with a paintbrush, added it to my paper and then braided it out. And I got a much subtler effect, or more subtle, one or the other, which I really enjoyed. Of course, you don't have to use Reinkers for this. You could smush your ink pads on your palette or your glass mat and pick that up with a paintbrush. Whatever works for you. I did try it with my Catherine Pooler Reinkers. This is undiluted, so again, very intense. I think I used Tiara, Do-Si-Do and Whipped Honey. But again, I was much happier with the subtle effect of the diluted Reinkers. For my last little experiment, I used acrylic paint, and I put this undiluted straight onto my mixed media paper and then braided it out, starting with the lightest colour, a kind of creamy colour in the background, then a corally orange, and then a pink on top. Again, bright and bold. You can dilute acrylic paints with water, so I put some water on my glass mat and then added 1 drop of acrylic paint to each, picked it up with my paintbrush, added it on, braided it on, and I love the way it turned out. Nice and subtle. I think that's the word of the day. Right, so here are all the backgrounds I made. They'll all go in my box of backgrounds and bits and will be turned into cards at some point. I have got an absolute ton of backgrounds to work through, so expect more background busting videos in the future. Right, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I hope it's given you lots of ideas. If it has, please do let me know in the comments. Leave a thumbs up, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and I'll see you back here very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.